Hi, I'm back in the sewing room today and I'll be making this tote bag. And it's a pretty basic tote bag and it features a pocket on the outside, one on the inside, and then little curtain grommets for the handles. And it is reversible. And it does change the shape a little bit of the bag on the reverse side, and I'll show you what I mean. So now the handles are coming from the inside, and I don't know if you can see, but the shape is more narrow on top and wider on the bottom. So let's get started and I'll show you how to make it. For the bag today, I'm using two fabrics, one for the interior of the bag and one for the exterior of the bag. And so I've cut my fabrics at 14 by 17 inches. Again, you'll need two for the lining and two for the exterior. For the pockets, I've cut two of my lining fabrics at 7 by 8 and two of my outer fabrics at 7 by 8. And then I'll use a little bit of interfacing for the pockets, and I've cut two pieces, one for each pocket at 6.5 by 7.5, just a little bit more narrow than the size of the pocket. And for this, I'm using Pellon Craft Fuse number 808. For the strap, I'm using the outer fabric, a piece at 5 inches by 60 inches, and I did piece it together, so it's 60 inches long. And I'm using the same interfacing, the Pellon Craft Fuse number 808, and I've just cut that a little bit more narrow again at 4.5 by 59.5 inches long. And you'll also need two pieces of batting for the main bag, and I've cut two pieces at 13.5 by 16.5 inches. And here I'm using fusible Thermolam Plus. And you'll also need 4 curtain grommets. These are 1-inch grommets. I have my outer fabrics right sides together on my mat, and I'll cut 2-inch squares off each of the bottom corners, and this will form the bottom of the bag. So I'll just use my ruler, line it up 2 inches this direction, 2 inches this direction, and use a fine point pen and draw my cutting line. And I'll repeat that on the other corner. And I do want to mention that the bottom is 17 inches wide and then it's 14 inches tall, just to clarify that. And so again, line up 2 inches, 2 inches, and draw my cutting line. Before I cut my corners out, I'll go ahead and pin my fabrics together just to keep them in place. I'll use my scissors and I'll cut both of the layers at the same time. And this doesn't have to be exact, but just try to stay on your lines the best you can. Repeat it on my other corner. Now I'll repeat that process of removing my 2-inch corners from my batting, both pieces, and then both pieces of my lining fabric. I'll fuse my batting, my fusible batting, to the wrong side of my outer fabric. And if you recall, I cut my batting just a little bit more narrow than my outer fabric, so there will be a little showing all the way around. I'll take this to the iron and fuse it together. Again, I have the fusible part of my batting facing the back of my outer fabric. And just using a little water. And I'll just continue fusing until it's complete. I have this one nicely fused. I'll repeat that process with my other outer fabric. To assemble the pockets, the first thing I'll do is fuse my interfacing to the back of my outer fabric, just on one of those. And then I'll fuse my interfacing on one of my lining fabrics. I'll take that to the iron and fuse those together. And I have shiny side down next to the back of the fabric, and I just kind of center it and fuse. Now that they're fused with the interfacing, I will place the other side of the pocket, right sides together. And I'll sew all the way around the 4 edges, and I'll leave about a 3 to 4 inch gap here for turning. I'll start sewing right here, sew all the way around, and then I'll stop probably right after this pin here, and that'll leave a nice gap for turning. And I'm using a regular presser foot to do this. And I'll tie off at the beginning and at the end. I've sewn around both of my pockets and left my gap, and now I'll just trim off my corners, and this just creates a little less bulk when turning. And I'll poke out my corners, get them a little more crisp. And I'll repeat that with my other pocket. And to close up this gap, first I'll press. And I'll fold the top layer as well, just kind of meet them. And I'll use a little water. Oops, and it wants to pop back out. And then I'll just flip it over and flatten the whole pocket. And then I'll repeat that with my other pocket. I'll go ahead and pin my opening closed, like so. And then I've switched my thread to some really pretty gold, and I'll do some top stitching, just 1 row of top stitching along the top of each of my pockets. And I have my 1/4 inch presser foot, and I'll actually scooch my pocket over so it'll be about a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And I just had to give it a little nudge there. And I'll repeat that with the other pocket. At this point, you would have to decide whether you want the same fabric of the pocket and the lining, or you want to mix it up a little and use your outer fabric with the lining. I think today I'll use my outer fabric with my lining fabric. To determine placement of the pocket, I'll simply fold my fabric in half. Create a fold line, and I'll do the same thing with my pocket. Fold in half, create my fold line. And this is just a little roller from Violet Craft. Now I simply line up those fold lines. And I just kind of eyeball the distance from the top that I want it, but you can certainly measure it if you want it to be at a certain place on your bag. And I'll pin that in place. And I've creased, and I will pin this pocket in place. And I really like the contrast between the fabrics. Now I'll sew the pockets down, and I'll still use this gold thread, and I'll use an 1/8 of an inch seam all around here, these 3 sides, and then I'll come back and I'll do a 1/4 inch seam just so the pocket is nice and secure. And I'll tack down, and again, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. The 1/8 of an inch seam allowance closed up that gap on the bottom. Now I'll come back around and do another line of stitching again with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you don't have to do this, but it adds a little bit more security to the pocket. Now I'll join the lining fabrics together, right sides together. I'll place a couple of pins, just 2 here, a couple here, and just 1 on the bottom. And I'll sew down each of the sides and across the bottom. I'm using my regular presser foot, and I'll back stitch to secure. Just kind of line up as I go along. And tie off. I'll repeat that on the other side and along the bottom. I have my outer fabrics pinned right sides together. Same thing, I'll sew down both sides and across the bottom. And I will press my seams open, and I'll just give it a little finger press to start. And I'll repeat that with my other seams. To box the corners, you meet the side seam with the bottom seam. Match them up the best you can and pin. Straighten out the fabric and then sew a seam with your regular presser foot this time right across here. And you'll want to backstitch to secure. And I'll show you what it looks like on the other side. I'll repeat that with the other corner, match up my seams, pin, straighten out my fabric, and sew right along here. Now I'll attach the liner to my outer bag. The first thing I'll do is flip my outer bag wrong side out. And you'll see the pocket is here on this side. I'll keep my liner right side out. I'll flip it around so my pocket on the liner is on the opposite side. I'll place it inside the outer bag so it'll be right sides together. And I'll pin all the way around the top, and I'll start my pinning by matching up my side seams. I have this side matched up. I'll flip it around. Match my other side seams, pin, then I'll pin around the top of the bag, and I'll be sure to leave about a 4 or 5 inch gap to indicate where I'm not going to sew for flipping right side out. I have marked here with my double pins where I want to leave my gap for turning, so I'll start right here at these double pins. I'm using my regular presser foot, and I'll back stitch to secure. And you do have to kind of rearrange a little as you go around. I'll remove my pins, and now I'll turn right side out. I have my gap, and I'll just pull my bag right through that gap. Okay, once you pull it through, this is what it looks like. And now you simply stuff the lining into the bag. And you can see your pocket in here and the pocket here. And now I'll take it to the ironing area and give it a press. Now I'll fold both of my edges in. And it's a little difficult here with the batting, but you just kind of work with it, fold it under, press together. And I'll just do a little section at a time to show you and give it a pin. Now that I have the opening pressed and pinned, I'll go around the rest of the top of the bag and give it a good press. Now I'll sew around the top of the bag with a top stitch with about 1/8 of an inch, and to do that I'll remove the base of my sewing machine so it exposes the free arm, and that way I can easily just tuck my bag in here and sew all around the top like so. I have my 1/4 inch foot on. I'll be sewing about a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And the first thing I'll do is I'll pull my thread up to the surface, my bobbin thread. Use my tweezers. And that way the bobbin thread won't make a mess on the back of the fabric. I'll sew all the way around the top of the bag, and then this will close that gap. Now I'll bury those threads. Just tie these. And I'll place my knot just above the surface of the fabric, about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm using a self-threading needle. Thread both of those threads. And I'm using my needle to go right in between the lining and the outer fabric so my needle doesn't show. And just pull through. And then clip the thread from the back from where I ended. If you've never used these curtain grommets, they come with a template. And for this size of a bag, I've played with different placements of the grommets, and I've decided for this particular size, I like the grommet to be 1.5 inches from the top and 4.5 inches from the side. So I'll just use my ruler, line the top of my bag up at the 1.5 inch mark, and I'll make a little dot at the 4.5 inch mark. And I marked that with a water-soluble pencil from Clover. This one's just a little nub so it doesn't show as well as the blue. I'll move my ruler out of the way, take my template, and it has an X here in the middle, so I will just line up that X right on my dot. And I'll use my pencil again and draw my cutting lines. So to begin my cut, I'll fold right through the center and cut just to make a hole there. And then use my scissors, go out to my drawn line, and carefully cut through all layers around my circle. Each grommet is made up of 2 pieces. One has prongs on it and one has ridges. So you take the piece with the prongs, put it underneath, line up, and then you take your piece with the ridges, and sometimes you really have to force it, but hopefully you heard that click and it just clicks right into place. I'll repeat that process with my remaining 3 grommets, 2 on this side and then my remaining 1 on this side. For the strap, I've pieced together 2 pieces, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you can see that. So it's 5 inches wide by 60 inches long, and I've pressed my seam open. Now I'll flip my strap so the wrong side is facing up. I have my inner facing the shiny side with the adhesive. I'll put that toward my wrong side of my fabric, like so. Flip it over carefully and fuse it together. And as I'm fusing, I just like to flip it over so I make sure it stays lined up the best that I can, and continue fusing. Now that it's all fused, I'll fold edge to edge, give it a finger press, and now that I have my fold mark, I'll fold each edge to my fold mark, finger press, fold the other edge to meet that, again finger press, one more fold, and this creates your strap, and at this point I go ahead and give it a nice press. And I'll do that for the whole length of the strap. Now that the strap is folded and pressed, I'll attach it to the bag, and I have my fold side down here. I'll put it through both grommets, pull it through the back without twisting it, so I'll keep my fold in the downward position. Like so. Now I need to join my 2 ends. So again, try not to twist it, and I will put right sides together, open up my ends, like so. And I'll secure them together with 2 pins. And I'll sew the seam right down here. Using my regular presser foot, I'll back stitch. And tie off. Now I'll refold, and I'm not going to bother to press that seam. Now I've changed to my 1/4 inch presser foot. I will sew top stitching about 1/8 of an inch, and I have my gold thread in all the way along my strap. And I'll pull my bobbin thread to the surface. Tuck it out of the way. And it's a little tricky to sew it while it's in the bag, but it's not actually not too bad. So again, about 1/8 of an inch all the way down. Now that stitching is complete, if you'd like, you can go ahead and repeat that on the folded edge, and which I'll do off camera. So there's the completed tote bag, fully reversible. You can carry it as a tote bag or crossbody bag. The strap is long enough. And you might want to do this project in 2 days. You could probably complete it in an afternoon, but if you're new to sewing at all, maybe cut your fabric one day and then put the bag together the next. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.